All right, I'm going to try to make this a quick video. The whole point here is to save you some time anyway, so what's the point if I make you watch an hour-long video to learn some time-saving tricks? So this is about stuff that's going to help you save you a little bit of time, some nice little helpful tips and tricks for Stata. So what we're going to start off with is probably the most useful command, I think, which is going back to earlier commands. So let's say that we had a couple commands in here. Let's say we're going to summarize verbal, and we're going to summarize. And I'm going to summarize that. Okay. Now you probably know that you can go up here and you can click on the different commands to go back to them and use them again, right? But you might not know that you can just use page up and page down to do the same thing from the command line. Much easier, much quicker. If you don't have page up and page down, usually you can use the function key with up or down arrow keys to do the same thing. Or you can do Control R. Will also do the same. All right, so that's number one. Next are some commands that you can do more quickly by not typing the whole thing. You might have already seen sum here. You can do sum instead of summarize. You can do tab instead of tabulate. You can do reg instead of regress. You can do g or gen instead of generate. Those are all much quicker. You can do di instead of display, in case you want to display a number, something like that, or some text. Lots of different ones that you can do more quickly. You can also actually refer to variables without typing the whole thing out, as long as you've got enough in there to make it unique. So for example, if I want to summarize SAT math, I don't have to type out SAT math. I can just do SAT M, and it will know that there's only one variable that fits that description, so it must be SAT math that I'm trying to get. You can also refer to groups of variables. You probably already know this one by a number of different ways. For example, let's say I want to summarize all the race variables. I can just do r_star because they all start that way anyway. Does that for me. Let's say you don't even have to do it that way. You can actually do by the order in which they're in the data. So I can do, let's say, summarize all the variables from black variable all the way down to a high school GPA, and then it will do all of that for me, right? I just did it from one to the other with a dash, and it did it everything for me very easily. This, by the way, is actually also a good way of checking if you have any missing data. By summarizing a variable, if you look at the observation number, right, I know that there are 2,259 observations in this data. So for some of these variables, I have everybody, but for some, there's some missing data. And so I can look at this, immediately know that I am missing some observations here. Another good tip is you can look at this variable thing up here. So this data set doesn't actually have labeled variables, which you probably should. But let's label a variable. It's called Moth Ed, Mother's Education. Okay, and you can filter them and search through them just by up here. If you just do education, right, it'll filter down to the education variable immediately, which is very nice if you have a really big data set that maybe is has some variable labels, but maybe a lot of different variables or something like that. So those are some good tips there. We can then look at the do file. If you're doing do files, a couple different tips here. So one is that you can just select some of the commands and hit go, and it will just run those commands as opposed to the whole file. If you want to run the whole file, you got to click off of it. That's one thing. Also is this here, set more off. So you might have written a really long do file before, and you notice that when you run it, it will output some text, and then it'll get to a certain maximum amount, and then it'll stop, and you got to hit a key to continue it. And if you have a do file that takes a really long time to run, that can get to be a real headache. All you got to do, set more off, and then that little thing that pops up that says more, and then you have to click a button to make it go away, that will be off, and so you don't have to worry about it. Another nice thing you can do is if you have a long do file that you want to stop at certain points, you can look at something, or if you want to look at something or copy something down or something like that, you can use pause. So if you do pause on, right, it will just turn on the ability for you to pause the code. And then if you put pause in your do file, it will stop all the action. And then it will stop right there until you do a Q, and then it will continue on, right? So that'll be a nice way to stop. You can look at your results before moving on to the next thing. It's sort of the opposite of set more off. Last thing I want to talk about is preserve and restore. So one of the bad things about Stata relative to other packages is that you can only have one data set open at once, and this can be trouble if you're trying to work on multiple things at once, or if you maybe want to just, maybe if you want to make a collapsed data set without ruining your original data set, or you still want to work on it. So what you can do is preserve and restore. So let's say I want to get a data set that has, let's say, average education rates by gender, but only for white people. But I want to get back to this whole data set very easily. Well, what I can do is I can do preserve, and then I can limit my data set to and what this will do is it will store the data in memory, and I can go back to it anytime. And then I can limit the data set to right people and say keep if r white equals 1, and then I can do my collapse command of mother's education, whatever, my female, and then I can do whatever I want to do with this. Maybe I'll save this thing, and then I do restore, and I go back to the original data. You can only preserve once, so if I'm already preserved, and then I try to do it again, it'll give me an error, right? So you can't do it. It's not only so flexible, but it is a good tip. So I hope that these are some good tips that will help you use Stata more effectively and more quickly. Thank you.